right, hello everybody. I'm here to introduce Dr. Thomas Osborne, and he will be giving the next talk. The future is now leveraging AI at the point of care. And Dr. Osborne is internationally known on his pioneering work at the intersection of healthcare technology and business. He is also a leading authority in the artificial intelligence and clinical innovation. As Chief Medical Officer at Microsoft Federal and full professor at Stanford, he is focusing on developing and deploying medical advancements that dramatically improve health and wellness. Over his career, he has forged pioneering collaborations with leaders across industry, academia, nonprofits, and government. Together, they have developed scalable solutions that enhance patient outcomes, reduce clinical burden, and lower healthcare costs. His contributions are published in leading academic journals on a wide range of topics, including advances in predictive analytics, clinical decision support, cancer, infectious disease, neurological disorders, surgery, pain, anxiety, falls, elder care, determinants of health, telehealth, diagnostics, value-based care, population health, drug repurposing, cost savings, access, efficiencies, employee morale, strategy, health risk, and safety. He has also co-developed and deployed solutions with the latest technologies such as artificial intelligence, edge computing, 5G, sensors, wearables, robotics, augmented reality, and virtual reality. And Dr. Osborne earned his degree from Dartmouth Medical School and completed his clinical residency and fellowship at Harvard affiliated hospitals. Please help me welcome Dr. Osborne.
Thank you very much. Great to be here again. Nina, awesome talk. I love so much of what you're doing and what you're working on. I'm gonna vibe a little bit off of your talk a little bit. Also, yesterday I had so many great discussions with so many really smart people here, and I did also, just like you, change my presentation a little bit. So some of this stuff is new and updated, and what I wanted to do a little bit is, like the last talk I gave was sort of, I drilled down deep into a specific type of new technology. You know, we talked about agentic AI and multi-agent orchestration. And so I'm gonna zoom out from that and talk about like more the existential kind of high level, what this means for us all kind of perspective. And I'll use some specific examples to illustrate and talk about some of those things. But that's kind of my goal, is to think about this in a wider lens, a wider view, and what this might mean for all of us. All right, so let's get started here. So a couple things to think about. This is going to set us up for the talk. So in medicine, where have we been? So it's good to know the context of where you've been, and that kind of informs where you're going and what's going to happen. And so that's the rest of it. So where have we been? Where are we right now? And what's coming? All right. I love this painting. This is a painting from 1891. And this is what life was like for people living at the frontier of healthcare. You had a foot doctor that would come to your house if you could afford it. And you can see in this picture, there's a young girl who's very sick. The doctor's at the bedside, full of compassion, not a lot of tools. Has a lot of experience, probably intuition, understands what is probably going to happen, but not having a lot of ability to do anything about that. You can see in the very background, if you look closely, one of the parents is there just hoping, praying probably, that something good will come out of this interaction, but maybe deep down knowing that it's out of their control in large part. So tools were limited. Discoveries also just by chance oftentimes. And diffusion of ideas, typically slow. So here we are today, and I got another story. So a really good friend of mine who's younger than me, let's put it this way. If you look at a friend of mine who's young, which in healthcare is anybody younger than the physician talking about the patient. So he called me and he's like, he wasn't doing very well. And you know, if you're a physician, like people, your friends and family will always call you for like a curbside. And I looked over his records and we talked about it, and there was a finding that was missed on imaging. Now, I know that wouldn't happen in Nina's practice, but this happened in a different practice at a major academic center. And so we figured that out, and he tried to get follow-up care, and that was the waiting list for this critical finding that was really potentially could devastate him. It was like 4 months just to be seen, to get to the next step before the next step. So just by chance, I knew a bunch of people, and we got him in the door and got him the best doctor in his area that I could find through friends to help him solve that problem. So that doctor was fantastic, did his job. He went home, and I was like, okay, my friend's fine, cool. So point number one there is misdiagnosis. It happens less and less with these tools. But that wasn't the end of the story. So he had this treatment, he went home, and I thought it was fine. I was like, hey, my buddy's fine, I'm gonna move on. And I just thought I'd check up on him. He was doing horrible. I could barely recognize his voice. So I was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? So we got him back to the hospital, and he had a complication, an expected complication, but nobody followed up with him. Nobody knew what was going on. They just sent him out, and they thought it'd be cool. So there's no follow-up, number 2 problem. So we got him back to the hospital. And the physician who treated him was working on a different electronic health record system than the hospital ED that he went to, and none of them were talking to each other. There's no interoperability or health information exchange. And the nurses were doing their workarounds on paper, and it just so happened to also be a very busy day. And they put him in the side room, in the waiting room, and he sat there. This guy doesn't complain about anything, which is another problem, right? He's got no personal advocacy, let alone somebody else, and he sat there for 22 hours in a major academic center that really is well respected. They forgot about him. They didn't know he was there. It was too busy. All these, confluence of things falling together. So I was like, he's in the hospital, finally, he's fine. And I called him, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, I'm still in pain. I was like, where are you? I hear all this background noise. And he told me he's like in this back alley, in the hallway. So finally we got him back and treated, and he had sepsis. I mean, this young person, multiple misses today, modern, this is a few months ago. So you wonder, with all this technology, how far have we come from that painting that we saw from the 1890s? So let's move on. So there's no shortage of problems to solve in healthcare. That's true, right? We all know that. But there's some that I think are particularly problematic that maybe distill those ideas down. And I bring this up because obviously the problems are not AI specifically, obviously, but in every deployment, in every technology that I've tried to bring into the healthcare system, the most important thing above anything else is knowing the problem. And as soon as you think you know the problem, you probably don't know it well enough, and you dive deeper. You talk to other people, dive deeper, deeper, deeper. If you know the problem very well, then you can take the next steps. Start with the problem, then it's the people, then it's the process, the data, and then the technology's last. The technology sort of falls out of all that. So, problem number 1, yikes. We spend a ton of money on healthcare in the United States. It's not unique to the United States, but particularly so in the US. Nearly $5 trillion a year spent in healthcare in the United States, nearly 20% of our GDP. We could spend that money on a lot of other things, 20% of the GDP. And in part because of that, more than a quarter of people that need care in the United States that are also insured avoid it because of the copays. More than a quarter of people avoid care, which even makes things worse because when you avoid care, it then turns into crisis care, which is much more expensive. And then you go to the ED, and admissions are super expensive. Okay, this is Sideways Pac-Man. He's eating the pain. I don't know if you can see that, but 25% of healthcare spending is waste. Huge opportunities, particularly with AI, if we do it right. AI implemented poorly can actually make things more problematic. But we're going to do it thoughtfully. Talk about that. So then you think about, okay, there's so many problems, it's overwhelming. Where do I start? Well, always start with the problem that's the biggest, most important thing for the people you're working with. Absolutely. Because you got to have alignment, all this stuff is going to be difficult. So make sure that whatever you're working on, people care about it. Effectively solve problems that people care about. Talked about that. But if you're looking at high yield targets, 90% of spending is on chronic diseases. 90% of spending is on chronic diseases. So people are going bankrupt for that. So is CMS, which comes out of our pockets. So there's a lot of incentives for us. So of all those chronic diseases, there's a top, from top to bottom in rough order: heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, arthritis, cancer, obesity. Some of these are preventable. They can be treated better. So if you're interested in big targets that are going to get the attention of payers or anybody else who's got a pocketbook, if you're an innovator or if you're a healthcare system, whoever you are, money matters. It's not the only thing, but it makes things move. Big targets. All right, this is fun. So this paper came out, I don't know, 10 years, a little more than 10 years ago. And so check this out. In 1950, the time for doubling of medical knowledge was about 50 years. So over your entire career, you could replace that knowledge once. That's digestible. 1980s, 7 years. 2010, 3.5 years. 2020, which is where this study kind of stopped thinking about it, 73 days. Overwhelming. I mean, obviously this is amazing. Like, medical knowledge is kicking butt. You've got so much important insights, but it's too much for the average person to digest. And many specialties who are trying to get a handle on it, because they're specialists, are not sharing that information, and there's conflicts and there's difficulty. So we need to think about that. AI can also play a role here, but only if it's done thoughtfully. 73 days. I don't know what it is now, but it's going to be more than that, or less than that in this case. Okay, burnout. Yikes. Almost every physician I know that I've talked to is experiencing some level of burnout. And COVID accelerated it, but it was there before, and it's just getting worse. And the people that are left behind are doing more work than ever before to fill the gaps. So it's a vicious cycle. One of those problems, let's look at this. Physicians should not spend 20 hours a week on paperwork. It's amazing. It's a poor utilization of a limited and expensive resource. We've got tools that can solve this, but only if we bring all the people to the table to make sure it's done right. Some systems have been deployed, I'm not saying electronic health records are one of them, but maybe, that have actually made it more difficult than it should have been. So we need to get everyone to the table to make sure it's done right. All right, another fun statistic: with part of physicians leaving and not being replaced at the speed of loss, we have a major shortage of physicians, and it's getting worse. And so it's worse in some areas more than others. So nearly 200,000 physician shortage in the US in a couple years, mostly in rural areas, but everywhere. And globally, this is an issue. Millions across the globe, a deficit of millions of physicians across the globe. There's a startup nonprofit that I'm helping that provides care in Ghana. They have, it's like a decent sized country in West Africa. They have like 5 cardiologists. It's amazing. So there's tools we can use to sort of bridge that gap. All right, this one, I'm particularly passionate about this one here. This came out in the Lancet. I wasn't a co-author, but I wish I was in some ways. So this talks about the 10 Americas. Obviously, there's one America, but there's 10 demographics that are represented in this slide. And each color represents a different demographic. On the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is a metric of quality, which is life expectancy. And you can see different demographics are having different levels of care or different levels of outcome. People who are living closer to urban areas and of certain demographics and have different opportunities are doing okay, and over the years they've been doing better and better. COVID hit, that's that little notch towards the end of that table, that graph, and then most of them have recovered. But if you look down lower on the graph, we have major disparities. And in particular, if you look at the worst one, in my opinion, is the one in red, that's Native America. It was never going up. It was slowly going down in this major quality metric. COVID hit, it took a huge steep drop, and it's never recovered. I worked on the Navajo and the Hopi in the Zuni Reservation when I was in medical school, and I provided care in many different environments. That is very austere. It is very depressing and sad to know that these people, wonderful people, are not getting the level of care that they could get within this most prosperous country in the world. So there's ways we can bridge that gap. And there's many reasons for that. There's socioeconomic reasons, and there's also medical reasons and access to care issues. All of these we can address with these advanced technologies if we do it intentionally and thoughtfully. Okay, so together, this is what I call the unhappy triad. We got cost, care needs, and provider shortages. All of them are amplifying each other in a negative way. And there's many things at that intersection. I like working at the intersection because if you solve one problem, it amplifies and turns around some of these things at the junction. All these can be solved, again, with our thoughtful knowledge at the intersections as catalysts who understand the medical, the operational, and the technical opportunities. Okay, so like I said, AI can play a part in solving all these challenges in subtle and profound ways, but it needs to be done thoughtfully and in particularly collaboratively. And I'll give a couple examples about that. There's a lot of really smart people working in this space, technologists, data scientists, but they can't do it alone, and we can't do it alone either, so we need to work together. So we talked about this a little bit before. I'm going to skip that because there's not enough time, but it is important, obviously. Training, I believe, this is going to be key. Education is going to be key. We all need to know how these, Nina talked about this too, other people talked about this. We all need to understand how these tools work so we can make them better, make them more appropriate for the uses, and so we can contribute, so we can not only guide them, but maybe also co-develop them and see where the pitfalls and the roadblocks are and overcome them. The other thing I think is really important is our jobs are going to depend on that too. You know, if we're not using these tools, people will find others that provide care with these tools because the outcomes are going to be better. They are better now. They're going to continue to get better at a very fast pace. So it's incumbent on all of us to be part of this. The other thing that I talked about a little bit right after the meeting, and I want to share with everybody else, it's also a moral responsibility for all of us. I've had the fortunate ability to travel around the world in a lot of different places. There are super smart, dedicated people all over the world who just don't have opportunities. Great ideas, no resources. You probably have Einsteins and Mozarts pushing brooms in the dark corners of cities. That is not only a travesty for those people, but all of us are not going to benefit because that's happening. But these tools have the ability to democratize access, to participate, to be part of it. It can build bridges. But if we don't take advantage of that, we're going to widen that digital divide where people with these tools are going to get better and those without are going to get worse. But if we can bridge those gaps, if we can share knowledge, if we can bring people to the table with these tools that are super accessible, then we really have a huge opportunity to dramatically enhance society as a whole. All right, here's shifting gears a little bit, kind of a cautionary tale. I mentioned this before, but I'm going to dive into a little bit more. Did a really important early work with predictive analytics using electronic health record data. A lot of interesting and important insights came out of that. What we also discovered is there's a lot of pitfalls too. And so again, these great engineers, most of them on this team were engineers, super, super, super smart. And they, one time, I don't know if this is published, probably should have. Some of these engineers would come up and say, hey, we got this model. It's super predictive. It predicts this really bad disease with great fidelity. And there's like 2 of us medical docs on this team of like 20. And we're like, okay, cool. Show us what the variable is. Like, no, it's cool. You don't need to know that. It's like, it works awesome. It predicts this disease. And I was like, oh, well, let's unpack that. And then the story actually was, okay, the biggest predictor for this particular model at this point in time was the fact that someone was getting a study done, in this case a lab draw, early in the morning. Anyone who got a lab drawn earlier in the morning had a worse outcome. And we're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how can that? So we dove deeper, and just hypothetically, we were talking to the techs, and we're like, what do you think that is all about? We're like, oh, well, obviously the phlebotomist is probably giving people infections, or they're doing something bad. Like, okay, well, let's dive. So what it turned out to be is the model was actually validating that the clinicians were correct. And I'll dive deeper into that. So when you have a panel of patients on the medicine floor, and you know who's doing well and who's doing poorly because you're smart, you got your own convolutional neural network in your head, you're looking in the door, you know the labs, you're going to round on those patients that you know are about to crump first. And you're going to order labs on those patients first. And those lab results are going to be tagged with an earlier time stamp. That's what the model was picking up on. So we had to throw that out because it didn't matter. So the model was basically saying the doctors were right, but if you didn't understand that, if you didn't have that collaboration, if you didn't get the brilliance of the technologists who are using these amazing tools and the data scientists with the clinicians who understood the context, then you're going to miss out on that. So that's what I'm talking about. That's where the intersection happens. Okay, here's another story. We were doing some studies, some meta-analysis on predictive risk. We're trying to solve problems that people cared about. Why do people do poorly after surgery? And we found out that there was a couple of variables that were really important. In particular, steroids, like being discharged like anywhere other than home is bad, but especially nursing homes. So if you're going to a nursing home, you gotta be careful, it's dangerous. And then we created a predictive model for that. So the other thing that was important is we found that in our practice that the stats were showing anyone who wanted a knee replacement were getting it. And, not everyone should get a knee replacement if they're 95 years old and they've got 10 comorbidities. So the physicians were sort of feeling like they couldn't say no to the patient in front of them, but we gave them a tool that said, hey, now you can have a data-informed discussion with your patients to say, hey, patients that look like you do poorly than others, so do you want to reconsider this? So it empowered the clinicians to have an informed discussion with a patient instead of being the bad guy that just says, no, you can't have this knee replacement, you have to suffer with the pain. So that was a form of clinical decision support that actually empowered physicians to have an informed discussion where they're not the bad guy. So I talked a little bit about this, the COVID study, the COVID predictive model, very powerful. This actually model was, go back a step, this was built on that knee replacement model or that large joint model. So we just repurposed it and it worked really well. And then we did another one at this point in time. Vaccines were actually an okay thing to do. I still believe that's true, although others don't. And so we were using it to prioritize this limited resource for vaccinations. And so I went back to my data scientist, Zach, and I was like, Zach, this model that is so predictive, like what is the variable that really matters? And I was hoping in the back of my mind, maybe there would be a modifiable risk factor, something you could do about, but I was just curious. And I was thinking maybe it's COPD or maybe CHF, something with the lungs. Because at that time, early in the pandemic, everybody knew that COVID was just a really bad pneumonia. So we did that. And he came back to me and he's like, hey, this variable. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. And I had another data scientist look at it and he says, yeah, it's true. And I was like, I don't believe this. And another data scientist. So I had like 3 people look at this because it didn't make sense. And what we found was the greatest predictor of mortality after COVID diagnosis was the use of aspirin before diagnosis. And at that point, like, I was like, what was it, aspirin? Aspirin's not an antiviral. This doesn't make any sense. And what it was, as I think many of you probably know now, is COVID is a prothrombotic disease, and aspirin's antithrombotic. We didn't know that then. And also, COVID was a systemic inflammatory process, and aspirin's anti-inflammatory. So the data was telling us an answer that we didn't understand, and the data was telling us, our data was guiding us in this sort of objective approach, and it was up to us to figure it out. Anyway, so we dove deeper and we found out that it wasn't just thrombotic disease that was causing that, it was actually more likely to be venous than arterial, but that's more data. All right, so we're using these types of tools for prostate cancer, looking at mortality. Also made a collaboration with the Department of Energy, which I didn't know this, but they have the biggest supercomputers in the world. So we had our data plus their supercomputers, peanut butter and jelly kind of stuff. And so, okay, for prostate cancer, most clinicians will look at PSA at a point in time and say, high, low, or not sure. There's a sort of middle ground that you're not sure what to do with. And most of the time, you just look at it at a point in time. And so we were doing some experiments, just messing with the data, and we said, hey, like it seems like the trends it's a variable within, it's a data point within the data point. And so we looked at trends over time to see if the trend was its own important variable. And it turns out it was. So trends over time actually mattered. So in retrospect, it makes sense, but we didn't know that at the time. So if PSA was going up and down, even if it was kind of on the low side, then that's probably, or on the high side, it's probably not cancer, it's probably prostatitis. But even if it was low, but it was slowly marching up, it's probably prostate cancer. So that in between PSA zone that you're not sure what to do with, the trends really help to put someone in one category to another. All right, this is fun. Go over here. Falls was a big target for us. It's one of those areas that I like to work in. It's sort of an unrecognized disaster. Falls is a $50 billion problem in the United States. $50 billion, right? I knew it was a problem, but not that. If you talk to most older adults, they're terrified of this idea because they see their friends, one fall and it's over. You know, even if they survive, they go to the hospital and things go bad. So we looked at these models that existed for falls. For example, the Morse Fall Assessment Scale. And in our institution, we looked at how well it worked, and it was like flipping a coin. So that was using structured data. So we thought, well, maybe there's more information in the unstructured notes, and we did some fancy statistics. And we found that, first of all, we could detect falls with great fidelity with using LLMs in the electronic health record. So now we could predict the falls, who's getting falls and who isn't getting falls, because most of that's written in unstructured notes, you know, the written word, the paragraphs. And so that was as good as a chart review. And so then we did some time series analysis, and that outperformed everything. Power of these new tools. There's this company, Pangea Data, that we're working with at Microsoft and some other companies, where they use these tools incorporated into electronic health record, these types of tools, and they flag aberrancies. Someone who might have all the signs and symptoms of a disease that's not otherwise diagnosed. Hey, patient's got this thing, you didn't realize it. That's important. But also someone who maybe has a disease that's not getting the latest standard of care for that particular condition. This is another thing. We talked about this briefly before, but I just pulled this up here. So education is important for everybody, including patients. Like everyone talks about, oh, patients aren't like doing their thing, they're not engaged. Well, like I don't do things that I don't understand either. And we talk a weird jargon, right? And so just in Microsoft Word, which is like out of the box, I said, well, let's use the Copilot with Microsoft Word and see how it does at answering something that I happen to know about so I can validate it. So explain acute ischemic injury, ischemic stroke in a couple of sentences at a 6th grade level. And it did a fantastic job. And you could tell it exactly what you want, how long you want everything. And that type of solution can be really profound when you're a physician that's busy talking to patients from many different demographics and levels, and you have to shift gears, or you want to send them home with a piece of paper or something to think about that's customized to them, or maybe you have some chatbot that your patients are calling into. So these tools are out there and readily available. I'm going to quickly go through this because I know it's been talked about quite a bit, but ambient scribes, ambient listening is a big deal, right? It's probably the most popular use of AI in clinical medicine these days, in part because it's pretty mature. But it's so powerful because, look, in this AI-generated image that I created, you see the physician and the patient, they're not interacting, the interaction's really with the computer. I think there's huge value there. And so there's been several studies on that, but basically it reduces the amount of time that you have to spend with a patient. It reduces the amount of time that you have to spend afterwards doing notes. Patients love it, clinicians love it. It's like value in many different ways. So if you're doing that ambient listening stuff, there's other companies that you can bolt on top of that that'll listen to the voice and actually extract insights from it. So I touched on this before, but I'm just putting this in context here. If you're already doing ambient listening to do your clinical notes, then why not use one of these other tools to extract insights from the voice as a biomarker? Pain, anxiety, depression, neurologic disease, another variable. And if you're working as a primary care physician in a rural community, anything else, or anybody really, but anything else can be valuable. You have another person, in a sense, helping you diagnose things that you just may not have the bandwidth to do. Speaking of, I love this. So as a neuro guy, I've always known that the eye is literally an extension of the brain. But that's not intuitive. You're like, hey, the eyeball is part of your brain? Yeah, the eyeball is really, like, embryologically, it's like part of your brain getting stretched out, like I don't know, plastic. And so that's a wild idea, but it's the way it works. It's the only cranial nerve that's, there's 2 cranial nerves that aren't actually nerves. It's really the brain being pulled out. And so early on, we were using these pictures of the retinas to try to diagnose eye diseases. And it was mostly using supervised machine learning, which those of you who know that is probably pretty straightforward, but supervised is a fancy way of saying labeled. So you take patients that have normal eyes, and you say normal on this data set, and you have patients that are known to have macular degeneration or diabetic retinopathy, and you say, we're going to label it that. You feed it to a machine, like a CNN, convolutional neural network, and it starts to learn. This is one thing, that's the other thing, because it's labeled, supervised machine learning. And then so someone came along and said, why don't we tag it was something from the medical record that's different? Like, let's just, for fun, put in gender. And it was really good at determining if this eye picture was from a guy or a girl. That's wild. And like, even in retrospect, you look at it, you can't really tell by looking at it, but there's something that the machine is picking up on. And someone's like, oh my gosh, we'll do that. Why don't we label it with a comorbidity? And all those are the comorbidities that people label. Looking into the eye with these advanced algorithms can diagnose not just eye diseases, but blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, carotid artery, liver disease, kidney disease. So again, imagine you're in a primary care setting, or any setting. They're sitting there waiting to see their doc, and you just do this huge screening exam, and you get all this information, and you can proactively get ahead of a disaster, which is going to be better for the patients, better for the insurance, better for everybody. This is a type of thing that is really going to transform our workflows and how we deliver care. Now, this is an HMD head-mounted display. This happens to be a VR system. We can deliver eye care at a distance with these tools now. It's wild. So you can have the interface inside, and you can test someone's visual acuity. And instead of someone who has poor vision trying to find a way to get to the hospital to get the exams, which, like, by definition is going to be hard because you got poor vision. You can send them an HMD, for example, and have this done at point of care. You can do their eye tracking, you can do the diagnosis, and sometimes the treatment, depending on what it is. Speaking of VR, this is another thing that I was working on for a long time. So we were taking two-dimensional CT or MRI scans, and with a collaboration I did with the VA, with Medivis, with Microsoft, and Verizon, we did a lot of interesting things. One of the things we did is we could transform two-dimensional images into three-dimensional holograms. So then you could have a more intuitive understanding of what that image was in 3 dimensions instead of planar. Then what we did, we were hoping to go the next mile, and we took that 3-dimensional hologram and we could place it on top of the person that it came from. So now you have X-ray vision. You could literally see inside of somebody in any angle that you want, the organs right on top of them. And the whole goal is that we could do image-guided procedures with this technology. But in order to do that well, you had to have that registration between the hologram and the patient really tight. Because if it's off and you're putting a needle or something in, you're going to be in the wrong place. So using these tools, these AI tools, we could get the registration hyper tight, and it was within a millimeter of variance. So it far surpassed FDA standards. So now we can do these image-guided procedures at the bedside instead of many surgical procedures that we do blindly. All right, so speaking of high tech at point of care, like these AI tools are being used everywhere at the point of care, and particularly interesting and amazing is we can use sensors and AI and all kinds of engineering to give people back what they've lost. And that includes all kinds of other things. Probably heard about brain-computer interfaces. So brain-computer interfaces can help people see, can help people overcome spinal cord injuries in ways that they can interact with the world that they couldn't before. These same tools that we're talking about, in particular the newer ones like large language models are really, really good at understanding human language. Turns out they're also pretty darn good at understanding the language of biology. And so we can understand the foundational gears of biology, which is proteins, in ways that we could never do before. Their structure, their configuration. So now we not only understand it, but we can make custom medications that are fit for purpose. There's tons and tons of other things going on in this space. A lot of this that is on this list, from CRISPR to robotics and quantum computing, doesn't necessarily require AI, but it's being amplified by AI. But again, none of this is going to be profound and impactful as it could be, and potentially could cause harm, if we don't have clinicians and scientists and engineers and data scientists all working together. There's also so much in the past that has been valuable, the compassion, the interactions, the insights, the intuition of a physician, that we shouldn't let go of or lose sight of as we're moving at light speed with these technologies. So we talked about this a little bit before, and I'll put this in here now. This is another paper that I was part of at the bottom there. We're using these tools to enhance and improve the ability to get things done, to reduce the drudgery of so much of the things we do in healthcare, collecting information and data, for example. And so this is a case where that last slide to the last image to the right is where we were using a tool that can summarize huge volumes of data in the record. And not just the EHR record, but also in the PACS system and also in different databases. So we can pull all this different information together, summarize it very efficiently, and reduce a lot of the burden and blind spots in healthcare. When you can do all that stuff, it really changes how we deliver care at the point of care, because now you have the equivalent of a team of really smart, dedicated residents and fellows that are gathering all the information, putting it together, and helping you real time understand what's going on with the patient and deliver care, but it's automated. This is going to change our practice, all of us. And so you think about this at a high level, you have data from the EHR, you got medications, imaging, wearables, sensors in the environment, path, genomics. All that together gives a more robust, complete digital representation of somebody, a larger window that you can do all kinds of interesting things with. You can predict with higher fidelity. You can try things out, and you can try things out in a way that with epidemiological data, you can understand what's likely going to happen for that patient instead of experimenting with different things. Here's another cautionary tale, and I'm going to sort of try to counter this a little bit. So this paper came out, I think it was a really good one, recently in October. Well, actually, it's already happened. So the endoscopist de-skilling issue is what was noticed on this paper. So they were an endoscopist, they use special tools, and they look inside of the bowel to look for anomalies, in particular cancer. And they were empowering that by AI to detect different things. And they did a study to see how good those endoscopists were after they relied on the AI for a while. And it turned out that they got really bad at doing this without the AI. And so then there's a big question about, like, is AI going to be problematic because we're going to over-rely on it and we're going to lose our skills? It's a real issue, and I think that's legitimate. But at the same time, like, who's using an old school stethoscope? I mean, I was never good at it, so maybe I'm a bit biased to this, right? But like back in the day, back in the 1800s, you put your ear to someone's chest, right? And then it was like, a cone. When we had a stethoscope, did we say, hey, like, we can't forget how to use the cone? Then you had a new technology, so you used that new technology and you forgot about the old technology that wasn't as good. And so now we have stethoscopes that have AI on them, and they can interpret things at the, right on the stethoscope. But you also have point-of-care ultrasound, which is really good. So when you have these new tools, are you really at risk of losing out because you're not using the old tools? Sometimes that's probably true, but maybe sometimes that's not. And so, sure, AI is going to, if you over-rely on it, there's a risk of de-skilling those things that you used to do manually. But if AI is demonstrably better, or if any of these technologies is demonstrably better, do we really need to hold on to the past? So I'm going to end here. So do we hold on to the past? Do we not? What's good in the past? Do we throw it all away? Do we keep some of it? So there's a futurist from the 70s that really saw this coming. So this group of futurists talked about holding on loosely, in this case the past, but don't let go. Because if you cling too tightly, you're gonna lose control. And so that was a famous rock band that said that, but I think it applies now. We're not just gonna throw out the past. There's things that are valuable that we need to hold on to, but we can't find ourselves just living the past either, because we're gonna be replaced and we're gonna no longer be relevant. So it's gonna be a major balance moving forward for all of us. Thank you very much.
Tom, thanks. Good stuff.
Thanks, buddy.
What do you see at the bedside mostly now? What are you hearing about people actually? Because that's all much cool tech, but I haven't seen some of it in my hospital.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, disclaimer, I'm not at the bedside these days, but I do work with people who are. And what I'm seeing is there's huge variation in general. In fact, there's always been huge variation. Like, talk about working in the Navajo and the Hopi New Zealand reservation. When I was doing that, I came from an academic center, which was really working on the latest and greatest. And I came there and I would talk about new stuff, and they were working probably a couple decades behind. So there's always a diffusion issue that's happening. I think I bring up the stethoscope thing here because I'm surprised. A lot of people are still using a regular stethoscope. What I see more often, though, is the younger folks, the residents and fellows, have a stethoscope that have the digital monitor on it, and even the waveform, different things like that. And some people that are empowered, perhaps, with resources, or are just overwhelmed, particularly in places like the ED, are starting to use point-of-care ultrasound because they just don't have time to wait to get the imaging done. And so it's heterogeneous, and it's happening at different rates at different places. Even within an institution, there's variation. So the big picture is it depends, in my experience.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah,
Can you
great.
go back to the doctor's painting?
Oh, yes. Let's do that.
Yeah, they're very...
Light speed.
And the reason I asked that, because this, I felt ashamed to say this, but this is the first time I've seen this painting. And what I'm touched by is that degree of ownership and presence and command and captainship of that physician next to that girl who's sick. And by moving away from that degree of ownership, and that's why I'm very happy about this conferences, yourself and others have spoken about the collaborations with the clinician and these AI tools. And as we moved away from that degree of captainship, having a radiologist rely on AI or radiologist with AI, comparing radiology versus radiology with AI, versus, for example, comparing radiology alone versus radiology with communication with the ordering physician. Has that been looked at? When the internist called the radiologist with a chest pain because of a fall and a bruise, did that compare better or equally to radiology with AI? And I think that's missing part of having that ownership of the physician is where we should not be having. We should stick to that patient-physician relationship that make it primary. Seeing you and others talk about that is heartwarming.
Thanks so much. That's really wonderful of you to say that, powerful. You and I have talked quite a bit in a short amount of time in this meeting, and all of your thoughts and questions have been quite interesting and impactful for me to think about. I do think that that's important. And as you were talking about that, something else came to mind, and I think this is partly what you're illustrating, is it's more than the technology itself, it's how things have just changed in medicine. At this point in time, in this picture, that physician was owning everything. They were the beginning, the end, fully responsible. They may not have had a lot of the tools, but they were doing everything that they could, and they knew everything about the situation. Because of the expansion of medical knowledge and the subspecialization that has to come out of that in order for people to keep up, one of the major issues that friends and families and everyone else in the healthcare system experiences is fractured knowledge and sometimes dropping the ball on things. When you have, especially in complex care with multiple comorbidities, when you have 5 or 6 different specialists, they don't necessarily get together to figure out what's the best one medication that could cover several different indications. So if someone has hypertension and heart disease, is there a medication for the edema or for the blood pressure that would also, is there a beta blocker better than an ACE inhibitor, for example? And so those types of questions and those types of discussions seem to not happen holistically as they might have just because of the artifact of how medicine is practiced these days. And my hope is maybe some of these tools will help bridge that gap, but it will only happen if we intentionally make sure or push them in that direction to happen. There's 1,000 different directions we can go in at this point. And by the way, like the things that I love your question, it's really getting me thinking. This point in time, like it's really, we're at the infancy. And the things that we do together, the people in this room particularly, the things that we do together are gonna set us up for generations because there's 1,000 different directions we can go in. And if we direct the ship in one particular direction, then it could be harmonious. But if we just let it go, statistically, there's many different options that aren't going to be great.
Thanks, and so I'd like to pose a problem to you that I have no idea how to address, but I think it's almost an existential threat. This is why. And you know, I'm a big fan of the potential of AI of next days. We've seen a lot of literature, and I think we've all had the experience where we can see that LLMs, particularly with AI, broadly speaking, can give very empathic, warm responses that people respond really well to.
Sure.
And when we think about how are we going to meet the healthcare needs of a world without access, that seems really promising. My concern, and I'm not sure how we address this well, is empathy is important to us as an individual or as a species because over how many millions of years we develop a thing to say, okay, this person seems empathic, therefore I'm going to use a proxy to think that their interests align with mine, which means that they got like that. And the LLM is learning how to emulate that, but it's actually not a genuine empathy, right? It's an emulation of that empathy. And we've seen that need for surviving in a social group means that when you get validation, which then capitalized on that by having thumbs up in social media, has actually led us down a path that hijacks that biological wiring to give leads to depression and bad things that we've seen with social media addiction as kind of a consequence of that. How do we capitalize on the fact that empathy is reassuring to the patient and to the user without hijacking that biological kind of imprinting process to actually cause widespread? I just wanted to give you a softball.
Wow, that's awesome. How do we prevent the machines from hijacking our biology in a way that may not be favorable for us, particularly our psychological frameworks? I don't know if we can.
I haven't come up with a solution.
I don't know if we can. In fact, they're going to be hyper optimized to do that, because the more they do that, the more valuable they're going to be. I mean, I love it when I get feedback from any one of these models that that's a great question. It's like, yeah, all right, that is a good question, even if it wasn't. So, and there's a couple of studies that support what you've mentioned, and I think you might be thinking about this in the back of your mind, that patients that were surveyed said they sometimes like the AI better than the physician. Even if it's just mirroring, even if it's not true, if it's hollow. People just like somebody to reassure them, even if they know it's not real. It's a tough question, To some degree, from a Machiavellian perspective, I don't know if Machiavelli's right, but if it solves a problem effectively, does it matter how it does it? I think you and I probably think it does matter, but to what degree? I don't know. And the other layer to this, I think you're also probably thinking about, is how it can be abused and misused to manipulate. It's a wild world. I don't have the answers to that, but something we need to think about.
Thanks, Tom. 2 back-to-back spectacular talks.
Thanks.
Hey everybody, John here. Thanks for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, please check out our website at www.americancollegeaim.org. Sign up to become a member. Also, save the dates, October 9th and October 10th, 2026. We'll be back live in Chicago, Illinois at the McCormick Place Convention Center for our 2nd annual live scientific session. Sign up at the website to attend. Until then, we'll see you all on the next Melvin Monday. Thanks for stopping by. See ya.